There was a time when a man considered it basic decency to let his wife finish a sentence. But what happened on the family face-off on a Thursday afternoon in October would remind an entire studio audience, and eventually millions of people watching at home, exactly what that decency looks like when somebody finally demands it. Ray Calloway had hosted the show for 22 years. He had seen nervous contestants, loud contestants, and contestants who forgot their own names under the lights. But he had never stopped a taping cold to make one man answer for 38 years of interruptions. Before we get into what Dean Sturgill did, and what Ray Calloway did about it, take 1 second to hit that like button and subscribe. Because stories like this one are exactly why this channel exists. Now let me tell you about Bonnie. Bonnie Faye Sturgill was 62 years old, and she had spent most of those years being talked over. She was born and raised outside Mount Vernon, Illinois, and she had a soft voice, quick eyes, and a memory that people in 3 counties quietly depended on. If you had ever bought a used baler or a 40-year-old tractor from Sturgill Equipment on Route 15, then whether you knew it or not, you had done business with Bonnie. The sign out front said Dean Sturgill, used farm equipment. Dean was 65, broad through the shoulders, with a handshake like a bench vice and a voice that filled a room whether the room wanted it or not. He had started the lot in 1987 with 11 machines and a borrowed flatbed, and to hear Dean tell it, he had built the whole thing himself. Here is what Dean never told anybody. Bonnie kept the books. Bonnie answered the phone. Bonnie remembered which farmers were having a hard year and told Dean, quietly, which invoices could wait until after harvest. When customers called the lot, they asked for Dean, held the phone away from their ear for a minute, and then said, "Is Bonnie around?" For 38 years, she had been the reason the checks cleared, and the reason half of southern Illinois kept coming back. And for 38 years, Dean had introduced her the same way at every church supper. "This is the wife. Not my wife Bonnie, not my partner, the wife." Like she came with the building. Their daughter Tally was 34 now, a schoolteacher over in Centralia, and Tally had grown up watching a pattern so constant, it was almost invisible. Her mother would start a sentence at the dinner table. Her father would finish it. Wrong. Her mother would start a story at Thanksgiving. Her father would take it over at the halfway mark and change the ending. Her mother would open her mouth in Sunday school class, and her father would say the 5 words Tally hated more than any curse word. What she means to say is, Bonnie never fought it. She would just close her mouth, fold her hands, and smile at whoever was nearby. Like a woman quietly stepping back from a door that had been shut in her face so many times she no longer reached for the handle. But there was one story Tally only learned in pieces, over years, from her aunt. In the spring of 1987, the same year the lot opened, the manager of the local AM radio station, mix out of Mount Vernon, called the Sturgill House. He had spent 2 weeks doing business with the new lot, and every time he called, the woman who answered the phone was better at talking to people than anyone he had on the air. Warm, quick, remembered everything. He wanted to offer her a Saturday morning slot, a live call-in swap and shop show, 2 hours a week, her own microphone, her own name on the schedule. Dean answered the phone that day. Dean listened. And Dean said, "She's not interested. She's needed here." Then he hung up and never mentioned it. Bonnie found out 3 weeks later, at the register of the Route 15 diner, when the station manager tipped his cap and said he was sorry it hadn't worked out. She stood there with the change in her hand and understood, all at once, that a door had been opened for her and closed for her. And she had never even gotten to see it. She drove home. She got as far as you had no right to, and Dean talked over her, the way he always did, about how they'd have gone broke, about how she didn't understand what it took, and Bonnie closed her mouth, folded her hands, and never brought it up again. For 38 years there was a sentence sitting unfinished in that kitchen. So when Tally filled out the application for the family face-off, the daytime game show her mother had watched at 4 o'clock every weekday afternoon, for as long as Tally could remember, she did it for one reason. She wanted, just once, to see her mother in a place where somebody would hand her a microphone, and the rules said it was her turn to talk. The family got the call in August and flew out in October. Dean, Bonnie, Tally, Dean's younger brother Otis, who could fix anything with an engine and had never once been early, and Tally's cousin Jo Beth, 28, who worked at the co-op and laughed loud enough to be a fire hazard. 5 podium spots, 1 family, and 1 man who had no idea he was walking into the most public reckoning of his life. Dean spent the whole flight telling everyone how it would go. He would take the face-off rounds. He would do the talking. Bonnie looked out the window at the clouds and said nothing at all. The studio was bigger than it looked on television, and the audience, 200 people in rising rows, hummed like a church before the first hymn. When Ray Calloway walked out in his gray suit, the place came apart the way it always did, because after 22 years, Ray wasn't just a host to these people. He was a man they trusted to notice things. That afternoon, he was going to notice everything. The Sturgills faced the Amador family of Bakersfield, California, a warm, rowdy bunch led by a retired firefighter, and the game started with introductions. Otis got a laugh for admitting he'd been late to the taping of his own family's episode. Jo Beth got a bigger one for saying she'd come to make sure Uncle Dean behaves. The audience thought it was a joke. Then Ray came to Bonnie. "And you must be Bonnie," Ray said with that easy smile. "Bonnie, tell me about yourself. What do you do back home?" Bonnie opened her mouth. She got out exactly 4 words, "Well, I help with," and Dean's voice rolled over hers like a truck over gravel. "She's with me," Dean said, leaning past her toward Ray. "I own an equipment business, used farm machinery, biggest lot in 3 counties. Bonnie keeps my books." Ray's eyes stayed on Bonnie for a half-second longer than the moment required. Bonnie had closed her mouth, folded her hands, smiled at nobody in particular. "Uh-huh," Ray said slowly. He looked at Dean. He looked back at Bonnie. And then he did something that nobody watching at home would even notice, but that mattered a great deal later. He took the question card in his hand, turned it over, clicked his pen, and made a small mark on the back of it. "All right," Ray said. "Let's play the face-off." The first survey question was a soft one. Name something people do to relax after a long day. Bonnie stepped up to the buzzer, and here is the thing that surprised everyone except Tally. Bonnie was fast. Her hand came down on that buzzer like she'd been waiting 38 years for permission to press a button, because in a way she had. "Bonnie," Ray said, "you buzzed in first. Name something people do to relax." "Well," Bonnie said, "I'd say they sit on the porch and watch TV." Dean called out from the podium behind her. The buzzer hadn't been his. The question hadn't been his. The turn belonged to his wife. Ray held up one hand toward Dean, kept his eyes on Bonnie and said, "Gently, sir," she buzzed in. "Bonnie, go ahead, sweetheart. Sit on the porch and what?" "Sit on the porch and watch the sun go down," Bonnie finished. Quietly, number 2 answer. 31 points. The audience cheered, and Bonnie looked genuinely startled. Like applause was a language she used to speak and had forgotten. Behind her, Dean muttered, loud enough for his mic to catch, "TV would have been number 1. It wasn't. It was number 4. Ray heard it, glanced at the board, and turned that question card over. Another mark. It went on like that, in a way that shifted the studio audience from entertained to uncomfortable in slow increments. When Ray asked Bonnie whether the family wanted to play or pass, Dean answered before she could breathe. Mark, when Bonnie's answer, a casserole, turned out to be number 1 with 44 points, Dean told Ray, "I told her to say that." He had not. Tally's face said he had not. Mark, when Ray asked Bonnie how long she and Dean had been married, Dean said 38 years before her lips had finished parting, then added, she'd have said 39. She's bad with numbers. The woman who had kept a business's books balanced to the penny since 1987. Bad with numbers. Tally's knuckles went white on the podium. Jo Beth stopped laughing. And 200 strangers began to do the quiet math that families sometimes can't do about themselves. Because when you see it every day, it's just Dad. But when you see it under studio lights for 45 minutes, compressed and repeated, you see it for what it is. A woman was being erased in real time, politely, smilingly, by the man who had promised in front of God to cherish her. The Sturgills were winning, by the way. mostly because of Bonnie. She hit 3 number 1 answers in 4 rounds, and every time the board lit up for her, Dean gave the crowd a big grin and a thumbs up, taking the applause into his own chest like a deposit into his own account. And then came the question that ended the game, though not in the way anybody expected. It was the 4th round, double points. And the survey question was this: name something a wife knows about her husband that he doesn't know she knows. A fun question. A grin question. The audience laughed as soon as Ray read it. Bonnie won the buzzer again, of course she did, and Ray, smiling, said, "Bonnie, a wife knows something about her husband that he doesn't know she knows. What is it?" And Bonnie Faye Sturgill, standing under lights she'd watched from her living room for 2 decades, took a breath, a real one, from somewhere deep, and said, "That he's scared." The audience laughed, expecting a punchline. But Bonnie wasn't done. For the first time all afternoon, she kept going. "He's scared people will figure out he isn't the one who," she means snoring, Dean boomed. Both hands raised toward the board like a preacher. "Put up snoring, Ray." "She knows I snore." "That's her little joke," she means Dean. Ray Calloway did not shout it. That was the thing people talked about afterward, the thing that made the clip travel around the world. He said it the way a father says a child's full name from the front seat. One word. Flat Final, the band's keyboard player, who liked to riff little stings under funny moments, lifted his hands off the keys. "Dean," Ray said again. "That's the 7th time." Dean blinked into the lights. "7th time what?" Ray turned the question card over so the cameras could see the back of it, and the big screen above the board cut to a close-up. 7 small pen strokes, in 2 neat rows. 22 years I've been doing this show," Ray said, walking slowly toward the Sturgill podium. "And today, for the first time, I've been keeping score of something that ain't on the board." He held the card up next to his face. "Every one of these marks is a time you cut that woman off in the middle of her own sentence. On her own turn. At her own buzzer. 7 times in under an hour, Dean." He paused. "And I get the feeling I'm coming in late. I get the feeling this scoreboard's been running about 38 years. The studio went silent the way a room gets when 200 people are all holding the same breath. So here's what we're going to do," Ray said. He set the game cards down on the edge of the podium, actually set them down. Which longtime viewers knew he never did. "We're going to stop the game. The clock's off. The board's off." And Dean, Ray looked at him, not unkindly, but without a single inch of give. "You like answering questions so much. You've been answering hers all day. So now you're going to answer mine. On the air. Right now." Dean laughed, one short, nervous laugh. The sound of a man checking whether the ice under him was still ice. Nobody laughed with him. "All right, Ray, shoot." "These aren't survey questions," Ray said. "No board. No points. Just you, and me, and the truth. First question." He didn't even look at a card. "What was your wife about to say?" "Just now, before you hollered snoring." "Finish her sentence for her, Dean. You've been doing it all day. You must be good at it." Dean opened his mouth. Closed it. It was a joke about, what's her favorite song? Silence. Who's her best friend? What does she order at that diner on Route 15 she's been going to for 40 years? What does she do at 2 in the morning when she can't sleep? Ray let each question land, and gave each one 3 full seconds of dead air, which on television is an eternity. "Dean, what did your wife want to be?" And Dean Sturgill, 65 years old, a man who had an answer for everything, who had spent 4 decades finishing other people's sentences, stood in front of 200 people and could not produce one single word. Ray nodded slowly, like a man confirming a diagnosis he'd hoped was wrong. Then he turned. "Bonnie, same rules. No board, no points. What's Dean's favorite song?" "He stopped loving her today," Bonnie said instantly. "George Jones. But he says it's Folsom Prison Blueses when the men are around." The audience made a sound between a laugh and an ache. "What does he order at the diner?" "Pork tenderloin sandwich, extra pickle, and he takes 2 bites of my pie and says he didn't," What does he do at 2 in the morning when he can't sleep? Bonnie's voice softened. He sits at the kitchen table with the ledger. Because he's afraid the lot's one bad season from going under. He's been afraid of that for 38 years. He thinks I don't know. She looked at her husband for the first time since the game had stopped. I've always known, Dean. Who do you think kept us from ever having that bad season? You could hear the lights hum. One more, Ray said quietly. Bonnie, what did you want to be? Bonnie's hands, folded on the podium, tightened until the knuckles paled. And from 2 spots down, Tally, schoolteacher, 34 years old, 12 years of watching her mother fold her hands, said in a voice that shook but did not stop, "Tell him about the radio station, Mama." Dean's head turned. The what? 1987, Bonnie said. And then Bonnie Faye Sturgill stood up as straight as the day she got married. Looked at the man she had loved through 4 decades of being interrupted, and finished a sentence that had been sitting in a kitchen in Mount Vernon, Illinois for 38 years. Mix called our house in the spring of 1987 and offered me my own radio show. Saturday mornings. My own microphone. My own name. And you answered the phone, and you told him I wasn't interested, and you hung up. And you never told me. I found out at the diner, Dean at the register. With change in my hand. And when I tried to say something about it, you talked over me. And I let you. I have let you for 38 years. So I want you to know exactly what you took. Because I don't think you ever let yourself know. You didn't just take a radio show. You took every sentence after it. Because a woman can only be cut off so many times before she stops starting sentences at all. Nobody moved. Somewhere in the back rows, a woman was crying without bothering to hide it, and she was not the only one. Ray Calloway let the silence do its work. Then he stepped close to Dean, and when he spoke, it wasn't cruel. That mattered. Everyone who watched the clip afterward said the same thing. Ray never humiliated the man. He just refused to let him hide. Dean, Ray said. Last question. Think before you answer, because your wife is standing right there, and your daughter is standing right there, and this is the most important answer you will ever give on television. Why? Why'd you hang up that phone in 1987? Why have you spent 38 years finishing that woman's sentences? And don't tell me it's habit. Habit is what you call a reason you're ashamed of. Dean stood there a long time. The camera stayed tight on his face, and America watched a 65-year-old man's certainty come apart like a gravel road in spring thaw. When he finally spoke, his voice was about half its usual size. Because, Dean said, I was afraid people would find out she's the smart one. He turned to Bonnie. His hands were shaking now. Big vise grip hands that could break a rusted bolt loose, shaking that station manager heard you on the phone for 2 weeks and knew. 2 weeks, Bonnie. I stood next to you my whole life and I couldn't stand for anybody else to know it. Every deal I ever bragged on was your numbers. Every customer that came back for you. And every time you started talking, church, the diner, this stage, people leaned in. Nobody's ever leaned in for me in my life. So I got loud. I got loud for 38 years, so nobody would notice I married up so far, I couldn't see the top. His voice broke. And he let it. That's why I hung up the phone. Not because you'd have failed, because you'd have been great, and everybody would have finally known which one of us was which. He looked down at the podium. I'm sorry, Bonnie, I'm not asking you to say it's all right. It ain't been all right since 1987. I'm just answering the man's question. On the air. Like I should have answered you in that kitchen. Bonnie looked at her husband for a long moment. She did not rush to comfort him, and the audience loved her for that, because 38 years does not dissolve in one confession. What she said instead was simple, and it was hers, and nobody interrupted it. That's the first time you've ever let me watch you finish a hard sentence, she said. It looks good on you. Keep practicing. The audience rose, not the whooping, prize-winning kind of standing ovation, a slower one, the kind people give at a courthouse or a retirement, the kind that means we witnessed something. Ray Calloway picked his cards back up off the podium, squared them, and said, Now, we've still got a game to finish. And Dean, I believe it's your family's turn to pick who plays." Dean wiped his face with the back of his hand, straightened up, and said the only thing left to say. "Bonnie plays." Bonnie's always been the one. The last 20 minutes of that taping felt less like a game show and more like watching a dam decide which way the river gets to run. The Sturgills won the main game. Bonnie ran the table on a question about junk drawers. Because Bonnie Faye Sturgill knew what was in every drawer in Jefferson County. And when it came time for the big money bonus round, Dean did something the producers said no contestant had ever done. He stepped back from his own podium, held out his hand toward his wife like an usher, and said to Ray, "She'll take both turns if you'll allow it." "I've had 38 years of turns." Ray allowed it. Bonnie played the round alone, and she played it the way she did everything, quietly, precisely, without wasted motion. She needed 200 points. She scored 216. The final answer, the one that put her over, came on the question, "Name something you'd tell your younger self if you could." 100 people surveyed. Bonnie put her hand flat on the podium, looked straight into camera one, and said, "Speak up." Number one answer. 41 points. The place came down. $20,000, confetti in the lights. The Amador family crossed the stage to hug her. The retired firefighter took both her hands and said, "My mother needed to see this 30 years ago." Tally was crying. Otis hugged his brother, and whatever he said into Dean's ear, Dean nodded at it for a long time. But the moment that traveled, the 15 seconds watched more than 40 million times under the title "Let Her Finish," came at the very end, when Ray did his sign-off. He usually closed alone at center stage. This time he waved Bonnie over. "Folks," Ray said, 22 years I've asked the questions on this stage. Today I learned the most important part of my job ain't asking. It's what you do after. You wait. You let the answer come all the way out, even when it takes 38 years. He turned to Bonnie. "Ma'am, on behalf of every man who ever answered a question that wasn't his, we're sorry, and we're listening. The floor is yours. Close my show." And Bonnie Faye Sturgill looked into the camera and said, "We'll see you next time on the Family Face-Off." That's, she paused, and smiled, and you could see her taste the sentence all the way to the end of it. "That's my final answer, and nobody gets to change it." The episode aired 6 weeks later, and by that Sunday night the clip was everywhere. Daughters shared it and typed, "This is my parents and nothing else." Husbands sent it to their wives with no message at all, which the wives understood was itself a whole apology. A pastor in Tennessee built a sermon around Ray's 7 pen marks and called it, "The Scorecard Nobody Sees." And in Mount Vernon, Illinois, the phone at a small AM radio station started ringing on Monday morning and did not stop. Because here is the part of the story that Dean Sturgill got right, 38 years too late. 3 days after the taping, before the episode ever aired, when it would have been easy to let it all quietly go back to normal, Dean drove to Mix. Sat in the lobby until the station manager arrived and said, "In 1987 a man from this station called my house and offered my wife a radio show, and I stole it from her. I'm here to give it back, if the offer's still any good. And this time I'm just the driver." The station manager was 29 and had no idea what Dean was talking about. But he pulled the old program logs, and he made some calls, and the first Saturday after the episode aired, a 62-year-old woman sat down in front of her own microphone, with her own name on the schedule, and said, "Good morning, this is Bonnie's line, you're on the air, and I promise you'll get to finish your sentence." The show was supposed to run 2 hours. The phone lines stayed full for 3. Farmers called in to sell hay rakes and stayed on to tell Bonnie things they hadn't told their own families. Within 4 months, Bonnie's line was the most listened to Saturday program the station had ever carried. Dean drives her there every Saturday. He carries her coffee in, sets it down at her left hand where she likes it. And then he stands in the doorway of the booth, and this is the detail Bonnie tells people, the one that makes her eyes shine. He does not say one word while the on-air light is red. Not one. A man who couldn't stay quiet for 4 minutes at his own daughter's wedding toast stands silent for 3 hours every Saturday morning. Because he finally understands that the most loving sentence he ever learned to say is the one he doesn't. The sign on Route 15 is different now, too. It says Sturgill and Sturgill, used farm equipment, since 1987. Underneath, smaller, ask for Bonnie. She knows. A year later, on an ordinary Saturday in October, a caller came through on Bonnie's line who wouldn't give his name. Bonnie punched the line anyway. "You're on the air. Go ahead, you'll get to finish." A pause, and then a voice the whole county recognized said, "Yeah, I'm calling about something I should have said on the phone in 1987. Bonnie went still. "I got a wife," Dean said from his cell phone in the doorway of the booth, 6 feet away, looking right at her through the glass. "She's the smart one. She's always been the smart one. And the best thing I ever did in my life was finally shut up and let the rest of you find out." He hung up. On air you could hear Bonnie laugh, a big, unguarded laugh, the laugh of a woman who starts her sentences now and finishes every single one of them. Ray Calloway still talks about the Sturgills. When new contestants start stepping on each other's answers, he'll hold up his question card, turn it over slow, and say, "Don't make me start marking this thing." And before every taping now, he says 4 words to every family, quietly, off camera. 4 words that started as a lesson and turned into a rule. Everybody finishes their sentence. Because that Thursday afternoon proved something that 200 people in a studio and 40 million online felt in their chests at the same time. Respect isn't a grand gesture, it isn't flowers, and it isn't a prize check. Respect is the 4 seconds of patience it takes to let the person you love get to the end of her own thought. Dean Sturgill took 38 years to learn it, and 1 afternoon on television to answer for it. Bonnie Sturgill took 1 microphone and turned it into a life. If this story moved you, do 2 things. First, hit that like button and subscribe, because there are more stories like this one coming every single week, and we don't want you to miss the next family that walks onto that stage. And second, the next time somebody you love starts a sentence, try something radical. Wait, let it come all the way out. You might just find out what she was going to be.